some of those aspects. So one thing that I do want to say, even though this is geared towards multi-audience instruction, this is really appropriate for in-person classrooms as well as synchronous online via Zoom, like we're doing right now. As part of this, we want to set the stage. Oftentimes, people are saying, well, okay, this is new. Everyone was trying to just scramble. Thankfully, at Penn State, we've been doing this type of teaching for a while now. It was first mainly classroom to classroom experiences for adult learners, but then in the 2012-ish era, we started what is called shared programs. And so if you are unaware, Penn State actually has 24 Commonwealth campuses. The largest is University Park, located directly kind of in the center of Pennsylvania. But we have, again, many spread throughout the entire Commonwealth. Yeah, thank you for State College, but I saw somebody was here from York. And so we have Penn State York as well. Trying to be nimble and allow for new degree programs, but not being able to hire enough faculty, what they decided was to come up with shared programs where you would have your traditional gen ed courses in person, but then your courses for your major would be shared through video conferencing. It first started that it had to be a classroom to classroom experience. You might have to drive to classroom, be with some peers, and connect to instructor remotely. But with the convergence of Zoom in 2015 and adopting it at Penn State, people were saying like, hey, I don't live near the Scranton campus. I drive 35, 40 minutes to get to campus where I sit with some other students. Can I just join at Zoom at home instead? And so henceforth, that was an option as well. And so two of the examples are corporate communications in the Northeast, as well as biobehavioral health in Western Pennsylvania. In addition, Sara Davis is an expert at what's called active learning flexible spaces. We have a few up at University Park, as well as those at the campus, the Commonwealth campuses too. And so here are just two examples. And we really looked at the literature, even do our own scholarship of teaching and learning research where it comes to taking advantage of these flexible classroom spaces. And so the convergence of the two really led to what we're coming over today. So some of you might have been teaching a multi-audience for a few weeks or even a few semesters now, but if you are unaware of this modality, this is kind of what it looks like. And so here's the instructor. This is Bill Goff. He has some students who are in the classroom with him physically, socially distanced and masked, of course. And then he also has some students through Zoom remotely. And so you can see that this is not for the faint of heart. It takes some practice and takes some grace, certainly as well. Very briefly, some of the aspects and formats that we have for a document that we're going to share in a few minutes were adopted from others as well. So in addition to our own expertise, Peralta Community College has a great resource for making the switch to remote teaching. And also Louisiana State University has a really fantastic document for active learning while physically distancing. So we really tried to take some of the format aspects of that, add our own expertise to create what we're calling the active learning via multi-audience instruction. And so before we go ahead and get started diving into the document, we have a question for you. So usually we would do a Zoom poll because this is not our personal Zoom room, it's the conferences. We're using a tool called Slido. And so Sara Davis put into chat how to participate. So if you go to slido.com and then enter the code 3187, you will be able to see the answer choices and participate. And then while you participate, this will change. So just for this first question, we answered just to make sure it was working. And that was my perspective. But it will change once everyone else jumps in. So we have some jumping around. I'm sure this will move a little bit more. So we'll give it a couple more seconds too. Okay, so I will let this stay open and then I will change it and to our next question in a little bit. But as of right now, as you can see, we have a large majority who have done online synchronous, that live instruction. We've also had a decent amount do online asynchronous, such as using just the learning management system in person, so hopefully socially distanced and masked. And then that combination between the two is 29%. So if you were one of those who did post other, we highly encourage you to post in the chat what that is. So I know there's different permutations, of course, with like high flex or blended, and there's the whole gamut. So we couldn't have all the answer choices, but we always like to hear what are some of the other things that are going on. So really quickly, just to indicate that, I know that we had it in Slido, but we wanted to show an example of what a slide could look like in Zoom. And so here, this is it. And then we would have used the Zoom polling, which we'll refer to later on in the session. So before we go into the multi-audience document, we want to kind of set the stage because it could be a little bit overwhelming. And so if you've navigated the resources already, you might have seen some of this, but we really wanted to focus on 4 major things. So that's setting the stage for active learning. You want to make sure that you can communicate to your students effectively and that you know how to share and organize materials. So that way it's focusing on the learning at hand. So after those first 2 categories, then it's engaging students, which is the bulk of today's session. And then one that is listed, but we're not going to be touching upon today is how to assess students in this environment, especially with academic integrity in mind. Also, kind of thinking column-based in each of these categories, we first said, how do we do this in the how do we traditionally do this in the in-person classroom? And so with that, it's really kind of making it something familiar to you. Then the next one, we really focused on 3 core technologies. So that way you're not overwhelmed with all of the technologies. So we used our learning management system, which is Canvas. We use Zoom, which is what we used to meet with students synchronously. And then we used Google Suite for Education, which we'll give some context in a moment. And next we have, if you want to be tech savvy and go and learn additional technologies, we have other suggestions. This is not an all-encompassing list because Penn State makes sure that anything that students would have to create an account for gets approved by our risk management office. And so even though it's a free tool, you have to get it approved accordingly. So it doesn't have everything. And then the last 2 are tips and tricks, things to consider. And then what I inferred to earlier, which is you don't have to recreate the wheel. We provided templates and examples for you to refer to later on. So before I dive right in, Sara did go ahead and put the link to the actual Making the Switch document, and I'm going to switch to that as well. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit just to make it a bit bigger. And so for those categories, they are color coded. So we have communicating for students, sharing and organizing materials, engaging students, and then last but not least, assessing learning at the bottom. So again, this could be a little bit daunting. So we're going to go over an example of how to do this. So announcements, if you just make a verbal announcement in class, students should know it. But how do you do this in a multi-audience classroom? Even when you meet with your students, you might say something, but it's really great to cross-reference it in a Canvas announcement. Oftentimes, in an online course, you would do weekly, an online asynchronous course, you would post a weekly announcement and people say, I don't need to do that. I'm meeting with my students. It's still a great best practice. If you have Canvas as your learning management system, and you don't know how to do it, there is a hyperlink that goes through kind of step-by-step how to do a Canvas announcement. The next thing is what additional technologies, and again, I said this is not universal, it's ones that are Penn State approved through our risk management office. And so we have two, which are more kind of informal, chat-based. I know that for this conference, we're using Discord. So it's kind of the equivalent of Discord. We have what's called Microsoft Teams, as well as Yammer. And so we have links, again, kind of walking through each of those parts. The next is those tips and tricks. And so you could write your announcement ahead of time. And how do you do that and set that delay? So this goes through how to set up your announcement so it gets sent on Mondays at 8 a.m. I'm an adjunct instructor who has been teaching for 15 years at a community college. And oftentimes I have to work and I say, oh yeah, I'll post it on my lunch break. And then I end up working through my lunch break for my full-time job. And so my students are expecting something at noon. So by setting something out ahead of time, it's already there for them. And then last, and we'll actually go into this, is links to templates and examples. So this, if you scroll down, not everything has it, but a large majority does. And thank you, Joni and Brienne, for those wonderful comments. We really wanted to use that as a springboard, because I think this is a great tool. We're all about sharing. And so trying to have something that's useful and can be adapted or utilized some aspects for. So I really encourage you to share this out with others, and we're always looking for feedback as well. So in the announcement template, this is something I do within my own course. And so I know we don't want those canned aspects, but you can have some canned elements that allow for flexibility. And so with the announcement template, it's something that I change up depending upon how the students are acting that semester. And so anything in brackets is like, hey, do something like this. So a recap of how well they did on the assignments. In addition, there is this bracket. I have it set so that students can take the low stakes formative assessment quiz as many times as they want with the highest grade counting. So if they took advantage of this and they almost all got 100%, I'll do the first part of the bracket. If they didn't, but I want to encourage them to do so, I then do the second part of the bracket. Other things that are in here or not in this example are, I always refer to like Data Security Month is in November. We have National Distance Learning Week, I think is usually in like February and March. So trying to refer to really relevant aspects because I do teach an introduction to computers course. So I try to make it as relevant and bring in those live holidays as well as news articles. So that is the one example that we're going to show right now. We will cover elements of this throughout the rest of our presentation, but please feel free to explore. And while you're exploring, if you have any questions, don't wait to the end. Type in the chat because we are here to be dynamic. Okay, yes, thanks for that. So everyone has their own teaching philosophy. So I try to be in the middle. Some people don't like the canned aspects. Some things it's helpful for sure. So I had referenced before the Google Suite for Education, and you might have seen Microsoft Teams, and you might be thinking, okay, well, we use Microsoft Office. Why are you going to be doing the Google Suite for Education? Depending upon your student demographic and knowing your students, you want to have a low barrier of entry. Within the state of Pennsylvania, many of the school districts, both in rural Pennsylvania and urban Pennsylvania, utilize the Google Suite for Education in K through 12. And so again, I've been teaching an introduction to computers course for 15 years. There has been kind of a decrease of students knowing how to do Word, Excel, PowerPoint, because they know Google Documents, Google Presentations, which we're using today, Google Sheets, etc. So we really try to advocate, especially in this ongoing time, to make sure that students don't have to learn one more thing. So that is why we really focused on the Google Suite for Education. So with that, we are going to focus on active learning and how to engage students in this modality. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Sara.
Hi, everyone. I know that Amy introduced me earlier in the session, but for those of you who are just joining, my name is Sara Davis, and I am an instructional designer in the Department of Teaching and Learning with Technology at Penn State University. So as Amy mentioned at the beginning of the session, this engaging students in multi-audience teaching resource was developed as part of a larger series that we offered to faculty at Penn State called the Engaging Students Series. And now we're going to take you through some of the activities that we did with our faculty who joined our session to give them experience with some of these active learning strategies and to let them practice and get them familiar with some of the things that they could do in a virtual and in-person setting. So the first activity that we did was just, we showed them how to use brainstorming. In our example that we ran, we used Google, but we are going to use Slido in this session. So as we kind of go through this, we focused on using active learning strategies as the way to keep students engaged with the content and learning process. So you can use an activity like this to just do a quick check of student responses to see any common themes to use for discussion and to share out answers with the larger group. You could also have students submit their answers anonymously and choose whether or not you want to share the responses with the class through the screen as well. So if you'd like to participate, go ahead and go to slido.com and type in your answer for what is active learning. Learning actively, yes. And you can see as the responses are populating on the screen, this gives students some time to review what other students are answering, to see if there are themes. It can be used, as we'll mention later on in the session, to do quick checks or self-assessments even. So yes, these are great answers. And there are many different technologies that you can use to do activities like this, but this is just one of the ones that we chose to showcase a brainstorming activity. So then you can also use either text-based discussions or other techniques to follow up with the brainstorming questions. So an example, another way that you can encourage participation is asking members of your audience, either in person or virtually, to raise their hands to share their answers or expand upon ideas. You can also keep the discussions text-based and use chat. So that's another example of how you can follow up with a brainstorming activity. So the University of Michigan created this continuum of active learning techniques that we use commonly in some of our professional development activities with faculty, and they list common active learning strategies. This continuum ranges from simple to complex based on the complexity of the activity and the classroom time commitment. However, when we implement these activities in a multi-audience classroom, some of the time commitments and the complexity of the activities can change drastically from what those activities require in a traditional face-to-face classroom. So we focused on pause for reflection, self-assessment, large group discussion, informal groups, think, pair, share, brainstorming, interactive lecture, and active review sessions for our document, because these are some of the strategies that were relatively quick to implement in a multi-audience classroom. So looking at these ones, while all of them are going to require some type of prep work in a multi-audience setting, these techniques are overall pretty quick to implement. Polling is popular and a frequently used strategy, so we're not going to go in depth about polling here in this session, but if you have any questions about it, please feel free to ask them in the chat or email us later. Class discussion in a multi-audience setting can be difficult and will depend upon the available technology in the classroom. Some classrooms are equipped with microphones and speakers so that students online can hear students in the classroom and vice versa. And if that's the case, then a class discussion can be conducted pretty similarly to what would happen in a face-to-face classroom if everyone was in person. However, If your classroom is only equipped with a microphone for the instructor would need to repeat comments from students in person for the students online to hear, and vice versa, and that could get unwieldy very quickly. So if the technology is not available for students to hear each other in a synchronous setting, consider keeping the discussion text-based if possible. If classes are small, you can use the chat feature in Zoom to do this pretty quickly. Another option is to set up class discussions asynchronously in learning management systems. And you can also use collaborative group notes such as Google or some of the Microsoft Office tools as well. And last but certainly not least, you'll want to make sure you tell students how you want them to participate and expectations for participating. So should everyone respond in chat? Should your students in person be also logged in via Zoom but muted so that they can respond there? And if students want to share verbally, should they raise their hands? So you can also include the clues from the virtual management or the virtual conferencing tools like you're using as well. So if you want them to use the raise hand, you can put the raise hand icon, chat icons as well. So make sure, again, that you are setting those expectations and keeping everything as text-based as possible for those who are online. So on the next slide, we're going to do an example. So here's an example of a chat-based discussion. It can be as simple as posing a question that can be a one-word answer, yes or no, but you'll want to make sure that it's presented both digitally and verbally for students to answer the chat in the chat section of your virtual conferencing software. So our example here is, how do you encourage your online students to participate in a class discussion? Go ahead if you have some examples of this or suggestions or tips. Please go ahead and post that in the chat, how you encourage your online students to participate in discussion. Yes, breakout rooms, small groups is a great way to do that. Okay, yes, we have some answers. Pre-reading responses, chat, asynchronous forums, great. Padlets are also great. We love Padlet. Roles with tasks, exactly. Giving them enough time, wait time, exactly, a lot longer when you have multiple modalities, certainly. Nearpod is a tool that we've used as well. I know that a lot of faculty and students love Nearpod, pausing. Yes, cold calling. Well, these are great answers, yes. So this is one of the most common questions that we had while we were doing these series, is how to encourage student participation, and these are all great suggestions. Okay, on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about embedded lecture activities. So these are common ways to engage students throughout a class. And these are all examples of embedded lecture activities. Some of these you've already seen in the presentation today. They can be quick, or they can take a bit more time depending on the questions that are asked and the type of technology that you want your students to use. If you're using features built into your virtual meeting software, they're generally pretty quick to implement. So polling, using nonverbal feedback icons, using the chat, all great ways to stop and embed lecture activities. Another example of techniques that we went over with some of our instructors in our session was Muddiest Point, student reflections, and self-assessments. So these are all ways for students to give input or spend time reflecting. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with the Muddiest Point activity, it's an opportunity for students to share what they feel is the most confusing or challenging aspect of a lesson or topic that was covered. We used Google Forms for this. Google Forms is great for anonymous submissions. So if you don't want answers to be anonymous and you want to know which students are submitting which answers, you could use surveys or practice quizzes in your learning management system for those activities as well. You can also use some of the same technologies that we used for the brainstorming activity earlier, like Slido or other polling and questioning software, as a self-assessment technique. You can ask students to submit their answers to a question, And then after they submit that, you can post or share a reference, a guide, a definition, a checklist, etc., for them to compare their answers to the responses in real time. And finally, on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about how to collect student feedback in a multi-audience setting. It can also be done with a variety of tools. This plus delta chart is an example of a common way to collect student feedback on an activity. You can use the chart to organize student responses in columns and quickly aggregate responses based on common themes. So in this example, the plus column is a place for students to identify well and well. The delta column is a place for students to identify areas of improvement. So I'm going to turn things back over to Amy now to discuss some more of the student engagement activities for multi-audience classroom.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. So as we mentioned when we had that spectrum, some of them were higher, some of them were lower. But in addition, some of them, again, were quick to implement, that if you're teaching in this modality, you could even adopt as early as for next week, where some of these others take a little bit more planning. Maybe you'll wait another week or two, or maybe if you're looking towards planning for summer, I know I'm starting to work on my summer course, to maybe do that then. And so with this, we are going to go over each of these and give examples of those. So the first is what is called four corners. So if you were in a classroom, I've also taught first year seminar, and say, hey, as an icebreaker, what is your favorite season? If it's fall, go in the front left corner. If it's winter, go in the front right corner. If it's spring, back left. If it's summer, back right. So that way it's a small group of students who can talk and interact. We were going to do what's called an annotation. And so we'll post a link kind of showcasing what this looks like. But there are directions here for future reference. So in the future, if you have your own Zoom room and you don't have annotations turned off to prevent Zoom bombing, you could go to view options and then annotate and then click on a stamp. So from this, you could get a lot of stamps on a certain color. But another way to do this is using Zoom breakout rooms and having the ability to choose. So because of having the security settings, we still want to know what is your favorite one. And so if you click on I think the nonverbal feedback icons, and then there is a green check mark, a red X, there's a slow icon and a fast icon. So well, I know there's others, but if you want to go ahead and use those, we could kind of get at least a little poll to see it's there. So if your favorite is fall, green check mark. If it's winter, which is mine, red X. So that's not anything against winter. If it's spring, you want to slow down because we're in the midst of it. So the slow icon. And if it's summer, we want to quickly get there. So use the fast icon. Okay, so from here, if you click on participants, you could kind of see where everyone's at, which is a great way. And if you are either the host or the co-host, you actually have a little bar that calculates the total numbers. So we have 9 who are for fall. We have it's changing, so it's 8, 6 for what is it? 6 for summer, 3 for spring, and 2 for winter. So we do have a hand raised. So Vicky, feel free to go ahead and unmute and discuss that as well. Maybe you're just playing around, investigating that. That's okay. That's great. So that alludes to our next one. And so we are going to clear all your nonverbal feedback because we weren't anticipating that last one. But a really great one is just to do a quick poll, yes or no. Does that make sense? Press the green check mark. If not, press the red X. And so with that, have you ever done annotation where you had students right on the screen for you? So again, if you click on reactions, you could press the green check mark for yes, you've done annotations, or if you haven't, press the red X. It's a lesser known feature, so I think it'll probably be a larger majority of no, but who knows, we'll see. Okay, so we have pretty much an even split almost. It keeps changing. About many of you have done annotations or even annotations as an instructor to highlight or circle things, just if you were standing in front of a class with a smart board or something like that. So again, for Zoom bombing, because this is a large conference, they have that feature turned off and not even an available option. So the next one that we are going to cover kind of just in a demonstration aspect is breakout groups. So if you've ever had it where you put students in breakout groups and say, how do I hold them accountable? Do I visit each one? So if you're teaching in this type of modality, you might want to keep it simple sometimes and have the in-person students kind of talk to one another and have the Zoom class muted, and then have those who are joining online remotely be in different groups. And so two things that we have done, I think Sara put them in the chat. I think she beat me to it. Let me just double check. She did. So is kind of a collaborative note-taking example. And both of these are available to you for you to go ahead and view and even adapt in that document. So the first requires a little bit more setup. This is first what we did. And so if you were in breakout group number 3, you'd go here and you'd go and take your notes. The one benefit to this, even though it requires a little bit more setup because you have to create individual documents for each group, is that it's really hard to kind of, or not hard, but a little bit of a hurdle to jump out and to see what other people are writing. And so for this, people could take their notes here and you could reference it later on. The second example, which Brett says is locked, so we'll check that afterwards and make sure that is unlocked, is a PowerPoint type of slide. And I know even today in an earlier session, they used this style. And so there's different permutations. We tried to keep it simplistic for you to make it quickly adaptable for your particular situation. And so we have it so that students would put their names in the notes field down below, which gives lots of room to type examples. And so this, if we would put them in a breakout group, they know to go to slide 1 if you're in group 1, group 2 on slide 2, etc. And then towards the end of the session, if we have time, we will be doing this style of activity for you to experience it on your own if you have not done so already. The next one that we are going to kind of mention briefly is brainstorming. So if you're unfamiliar, Zoom itself actually has a whiteboard feature where you could have people type out and annotate. There are some other ones that were mentioned before, like Padlet and I think Wakelet. So there's a couple of ones that are out there. Again, anything needs to be Penn State approved. So Padlet is. Another one is Google Jamboard. And so this was even for my own students. And I use this day one, kind of like in the first 10 minutes before we went over the syllabus. So trying to show that I'm a human and I want to be their best advocate, and saying what makes a good faculty member. And that way having it through Google Jamboard, I said it's anonymous. So that way they put little sticky notes. One even drew a smiley face. And so I tried to address the questions in real time. So ones I always say, yes, I'm understanding. I know that you have a lot of other obligations. So I always grant a 1-week extension as long as you reach out to me prior to the due date. I try to be funny. I'm not the funniest person. My husband is the funny one in our relationship, but I'll try to add some quirky aspects here and there for sure. So that is one additional aspect. So we already have, I had activated it earlier, so some people did this. And you could use tools like Slido for it. So if you want to keep it in the same tool, saying, hey, Slido for polling, Slido for brainstorming, can I do that for this? What are 1 to 3 keywords that you would use to describe as a good faculty member? So if you don't remember and you exited out at slido.com and you enter code 318725. engaging, hence the name of our session, caring, funny, try to be funny. Equity conscious, that's another great one. And so even for me, I know this is not an equity focused session. I even have my own syllabus statement on equity and trying to be inclusive and to provide examples of them in course content, and diverse for sure. Flexible. And so this one is a little bit different than our earlier one. It creates what is called a word cloud. So words that have been used a lot are bigger and bolder and front and center compared to the others. So we'll leave this open, but we'll continue on to our other aspects today. Another example is often people say, okay, breakout groups are wonderful. Chats for everyone is great, but how do we get that, hey, turn to your neighbor, or like think, pair, share, or turn and talk? One way to do this, which is a little bit out of the box, is to use the chat, but make sure you send a private message to someone. It could even be an icebreaker where you might have a spreadsheet ahead of time of who that partner is, so that they know, and that way they're not having multiple individual conversations. But say, hey, Amy, you're supposed to talk to Sarah, and what is your favorite dessert? And so mine is graham cracker cream pie, which is kind of a Pennsylvania Dutch thing. And so you could have that individual's conversation, and then you could ask to share it out to the larger group. And the other thing that Sara had mentioned, and we always try to model too, is outside of this, you could have conversations that are class-wide, but using that @ symbol to make sure that you know who you're replying to, and they can see that is really a great feature for and best practice for Zoom. The other thing is, for small groups, do a lot more icebreakers. I was in a session earlier today where they said, well, how do you get to know your students? Sometimes with icebreakers, they don't want to do that. I've had really great success with this one. I have a lot of small cohorts of students with like criminal justice or education or business with like marketing, accounting, etc. Whether I put them in groups where within their major or just random, they always talk about what they're seeing, which this semester was a trend of kind of investigation, criminal aspects and documentaries, which was really interesting. And so then I try to convey myself as an instructor. I'm a late mother in life. And so I have a toddler. So we watched Little Baby Bum comedy for sure, and Tom Hanks as well. So our last one, which is a little bit more difficult, and we'll do an example of this after we show you how to make copies of aspects of the navigating document, is the gallery walk. So a gallery walk, if you are unfamiliar, you kind of push things aside if you can, if you do have flexible furniture, and you have students work in small groups and create like a brainstorm or what their thoughts are on a topic. From there, the groups visit everyone else, kind of like an art gallery. You say, hey, time to switch. And then you go to the next one, and you'd be there and maybe analyze it, maybe that next group. So if I'm in group 1 and we go to group 2, we'd say, oh, we didn't think of that, or, oh, that's a great point, or maybe they should think about this, and leave those kind of snippets of advice. And then when it's time to change, we'd go to station number 3, etc. So some people say there's no way to replicate this. There's always that challenge, and that is technically possible. So because that requires breakout groups, we're going to jump ahead and then come back to it, because I know that people have back-to-back sessions, and in case you do peace out a little bit early, that's okay. But we want to focus on here. So the template for personalization. So I'm going to go back to that first announcement example. And if you are familiar with Google Docs and you want to make a copy for your own, if you just go to File, Make a Copy, it'll copy into your own Google Drive for you to move wherever you want. If you're saying, I don't do Google, how do I get this? From there, you go to File, Download, and I would recommend the Microsoft product. So here it's Docs, if you want to make a copy of this whole thing and download it. The making the switch to multi-audience teaching, it would be the Excel spreadsheet. And so what you would do is just go to File, Download, and Microsoft, and you could see it's now downloaded to my computer. And so that is as simple as it is. Sometimes it's one little thing that's hidden. And so for any of these tips and tricks over here and templates, feel free to go ahead. Some of them are instructional videos, but most of them are those templates that we created. So feel free to use as you see fit with that. So I'm going to pause there before we go into our breakout activity, just to see if there's any questions. Okay, and thank you, Debbie, for posting out the session evaluation link. And Sarah did have that in case you do have to go to something else, the resources for today. So with that, we are going to go ahead and go back, and we are going to do an icebreaker activity where you do go through the gallery walk. So to save on time, we're not having you create like, what is your favorite icebreaker? We kind of automatically did that for you, so you don't have to do that part and brainstorm. And so what we are going to do, and we'll post this link in the chat, but I wanted to, oops, I did the wrong one. I apologize. This one. So we are going to do that gallery walk activity. So if you are in breakout group number 1, you're going to start on slide 1. If you're in breakout group number 2, you're going to start on slide 2. And continuing on. So with that, we want you to analyze the slide. And what do you like about it? What don't you like about it? You could just simply add your notes down here. If this is an activity where we would use multiple times, we'd go over how to even comment directly on the slide. But just for simplicity's sake, we're going to say for you to add your notes down here. Then in about 2 minutes time, we'll say, go to the next slide where you'll go and move to the next one. And then the hope is that you would cycle through all of them. So we're just going to make it so that it's a change 1 or 2 times, just so that you could have that experience. So with that, we are going to have it so that it's about 4 to 5 participants in each room, and you will have a pop-up window that says join breakout group room, and it'll have that number. So I forgot to include the one chat, so I might have to visit. So for those who stayed behind, that's okay that you didn't join. And so that is actually a great question, and that is on um, the overall document. If you look at the very top of the multi-audience document, the instructions are there, but it is part of that Pressbook link where it has all of those items. So welcome back, everyone. We had forgotten that we do have a break of between sessions. And so because we started late, we didn't have time to move on to analyze, but you could kind of get the hint for that. And so we'd like to thank you today for everything. We are posting 2 links. One is the overall press book that we have for our ongoing series, where this is one of the sessions. And it was actually nominated for one of the virtual conference awards. So even if you don't vote for us, it's okay, but there's videos that explain a little bit more in depth about that as well. And then if you want the tailored slides, we'll post that next in the chat, both as the short URL and the lengthy one in case your institution has those blocked. So thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Sarah. Well done. Everybody, if you give a little bit of love with the reactions, that's always fun too. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you so much.